Yeah, so this is inference with neural networks, and I will start talking about the things you need to know to make that work. But mostly you already know everything you need to do this assignment. So I think you guys are just about on track to get everything done and finish up this course, which would be great. Okay. I'm going to defer to another guy. This is Andrew Ng, who's a professor at Stanford, was a professor at Stanford. Then he took a job at Baidu. I don't know what he's doing now. Actually, he went to Coursera for a while, then he went to Baidu. And point is, he's a really famous machine learning guy. He's the one that wrote that paper about hierarchical learning and machine learning. The main reason I'm showing it to you now is he has some good things to say about what he calls the one learning algorithm hypothesis. Let me give you just a quick background on what that's about. In fact, maybe I'll talk while I try to debug my sound, because I'm confident my sound's not going to just work. It never does.
Can we do better?
Nope, you can't hear that. It's coming from just my system. How about now? Now it went silent. What if I push this button and turn this knob? Hey, that worked. Okay, so he's talking about the one learning algorithm hypothesis, which basically says, if you think about it, there are about 3 billion nucleotides in the human DNA, give or take. That's a very rough estimate. And there are 100 trillion synaptic connections in your brain. So what does that mean? Is your brain highly repetitive, or is the structure of your brain not fully encoded in your DNA? What do you think? Yeah, I think so. I think it's pretty obvious that humans learn. Is it not? If they didn't learn, we wouldn't have schools. And we do have schools because they're effective and people learn. And you can tell because people that don't go through education don't come out knowing as much. It's kind of obvious to me brains learn. And yet, people usually credit the amazingness of the human brain to evolution, saying, isn't it amazing how our intelligence has evolved over the billions of years? Has our intelligence evolved? Or has what actually evolved been an algorithm, and then the algorithm is what helps us through our lives to learn and develop intelligence? I think it's clearly the latter. Therefore, there's a lot of interest in figuring out the algorithm that your brain uses to form those synaptic connections and learn, so that we can then do the same thing in machines and then try to achieve greatness or help humans better or replace humans and wipe them off the face of the earth or whatever we're trying to do this for. There's just a lot of interest in figuring out those algorithms. Now, there may be one or there may be multiple algorithms. What do you think it is? Yeah, it's got to be multiple. In fact, we've explicitly identified at least 3 different ones. And maybe I'll talk about some of that later. But 3 is not a big number. So, and maybe there's more than 3, I don't know. But by 3, he's going to say 1, but pretend it's a little more than that. And to a large extent, they may all be wrapped up in sort of the same methods. And anyway, let's hear what he has to say, and then I'll talk some more. Yeah, please.
What if people get, I don't really know if this is the correct question. What if people get stuck in their ways? You know?
You mean, why do people get dogmatic?
Or, I mean, the only example is there's a test where they do a gear pairing where when you turn the handle on a bicycle, the wheel turns the opposite direction.
Okay.
The amount of time it takes for a child to learn it is hours, and the amount of time it takes an adult to relearn how to drive the bicycle is like weeks.
Ah, so now we're talking about neuroplasticity.
Yeah, like we've optimized.
Okay.
We've over-optimized.
So neuroplasticity is about this. When you're little, you learn fast. When you're old, you learn slowly, right? It kind of makes sense, doesn't it? That when you're young, most of your life is ahead of you. When you're old, most of your life is behind you, right? Well, if you can learn quickly, then that means you're adapting to understand the world ahead of you, but you can also lose what's behind you, right? Your memories are fuzzy, the more plasticity you have in your mind. Can anybody remember what it was like to be born? Hopefully none of you can, right? Because your brains at that time were ridiculously plastic, meaning you were forming all kinds of neural connections. Now, actually, some people have suggested that you start with a whole bunch of connections, and what actually happens is they start pruning the connections. But however it works, whatever the algorithm is, it learns better when you're young than it does when you're old. And this strongly suggests that humans have a certain span of life, which we already knew. But the fact that we're all going to die is kind of imprinted in the way our brains work, because it makes a lot of sense as you've learned a bunch of things that you start retaining it more and focusing less on learning new things.
So then we kind of had this question in the philosophy class, if you could choose to transfer your consciousness into a robot body.
Ah, right. So I guess if humans could be immortal, what level of plasticity would we want? Because if you're very, very plastic, then you can learn rapidly, but you have very little memory, and so you're living in a tinier window of time. If you make your mind have very little plasticity, then you have a very big, large memory, and you have all these experiences, but you can't learn or progress. And so how do you tune that for immortality? Well, you can't, because no extreme will have both the capability to learn and an infinite amount of memory. Therefore, we are destined to live within a window no matter how big the eternities might be, even if we upload our consciousnesses, which of course is way beyond the philosophy of this class or anything I should really be talking about. But it's super fun to speculate about. Sure, why not? But let's hear about the one learning algorithm first, and then let's come back and spend a bunch of time philosophizing. Maybe we should dedicate the last 2 or 3 lectures to just sitting around debating transhumanism. Would that be fun? Yeah. Okay, cool. In fact, I built this demo. I'll come back to that. For now, Andrew Ng.
Skepticism, but for me, sort of all my thinking about. Let's take a break. Could you come?
Okay, good enough. Note to self, I should cut his video out of my video because it's not fair to use somebody else's lecture in the middle of mine. But, you know, there you go. Isn't that fascinating, though, that it appears from everything we understand about the brain that while certain parts of the brains are clearly designated for things, meaning, you know, our visual cortex is pretty much for vision and everybody that can see. You know how blind people are notorious for having hypersensitive senses, right? Why is that? Well, it's because their visual cortex isn't doing anything, so it takes over other jobs. This strongly implies that the brain is not predestined with its intelligence as written in your DNA. And we know it can't be anyway because there's not enough bits there. You simply can't write intelligence in the DNA. It has to be learned. And therefore, doesn't it make a lot of sense that, you know, there's some algorithm? Is it backpropagation? No, it's not. I'll tell you why. Brain cells don't have the ability to send a vector of information back to the previous brain cell that plugs into it. So there's been a lot of work trying to figure out a biologically plausible version that's analogous with backpropagation, and there's a few that they've come up with. There was a paper I read a few years ago in which they found that they could do something almost as good as backpropagation without passing any information back to the calling cell, and it was like backprop. But then we have to ask ourselves, do we actually want the biologically plausible algorithm, or do we want the better algorithm? And I don't know. It seems to me that backprop is probably surged slightly ahead of the way the brain actually learns in specific locales. Although that could be totally wrong because the brain as a whole is learning leaps and bounds ahead of our deep learning algorithms. And we really want our deep learning algorithms to be awesome. We're still just trying to figure out how. So I don't know. As far as all things are concerned, though, we haven't yet found a limitation of backpropagation that seems like it can't do what the brain is doing. Therefore, I claim that continuing to press forward with it seems like the right direction until we hit some kind of limitation, and then we'll figure out why and what the algorithm needs to look like. Alternatively, we could wait for neuroscientists to figure out the brain and then code it up. So 2 approaches. Simulate the brain or engineer a brain. Which one's going to work better? Well, I don't know. You remember the time when we were trying to build flying machines? Did we get a bunch of smart engineers to build the best plane we could, or did we try to build one with flapping wings that looked like a bird and then morphed it to become a plane? Yeah, we actually did start with flapping wings. Those ones just didn't fly very well. Yeah, but now we don't care what birds do anymore because we've far exceeded them, right? I mean, we understand aerodynamics well enough that we can put a plane, we put them in space. Birds don't go into space. Therefore, we just don't study feathers very much anymore because we don't care. We have our own wind tunnels. I kind of personally feel that we've already surpassed the brain in many ways. I think we are going to figure out a better high-level structure and not care about biology in the near future. That's pushing it a bit. I can't back that up or support it. But that's an intro to, now that we've gotten through these first several lectures on how backpropagation can be used for optical character recognition and fitting data and predicting time series, this is kind of the basic stuff that we've gotten to. Now I want to start getting into the newer bleeding edge, trying to figure out what cognition is and how we can understand deeper thinking with our machine learning algorithms. And that's where I intend to basically spend the remainder of the class, is just philosophizing on the future of machine learning and where it's going and how we can do much cooler things than just predict numbers, is my plan. So with that, I do want to get into, I started on recurrent neural networks, or I said I was going to do recurrent neural networks. Let me do recurrent neural networks. And then I want to get into inference a little bit, which is what assignment 6 is all about, to prep you for that assignment. And then from there, we'll go into cognitive architectures. Okay, before I start, any questions on anything we've done so far? Yeah.
Produce a recurrent assignment?
So in assignment 6, we actually use a topology that is recurrent. Is there a recurrent picture? No, there's not. We train a recurrent model in assignment 6, but we do it through a non-traditional way of doing it. As far as an assignment, I guess I was kind of planning to not do that. Would you like an assignment that asks you to do a recurrent neural network thing?
Different enough from what you plan on doing in 6 that it would be beneficial?
Well, here's what I would do. Let me talk about LSTM networks today. Your assignment is redo this one with an LSTM model. And you can either do it with one you code up or one that's out there. This assignment will be worth 0 points, and it's due yesterday. Yeah, okay. So there you go. I've made an assignment for you. Okay, let's talk about recurrent models, because have you ever noticed that humans don't live at a static moment in time, right? I mean, frankly, it's just kind of, we keep doing these image recognition problems, but humans don't do that problem. I mean, we can look at a photograph and say what it is, but mostly we're operating with, we see people and the people are moving. I look out at this room and I see chairs and people and lights and all these things, but they're all active in time, and it would be really weird. In fact, if you all just sat perfectly still and didn't blink for, 3 seconds, that would creep me out, because that has never happened. There's always somebody putting his foot up on the chair and leaning back or something, I didn't mean to point you out, but time is really important to the way humans operate. Therefore, if we want human-like things, it's got to be temporal in nature. Does it not? Yeah.
You mean like we're not